Hi, sir. I will now make some announcements for Hashicorp user group Kyiv in Ukrainian. So if you don't know Ukrainian, it's okay. It's not related to this meetup at all. Так, дивіться. Перший маленький анонс. Крім мене, скоро буде ще один співорганізатор Hashicorp юзер групи. Це Валерій Татарін. Він плюс-мінус почне працювати з нами, умовно кажучи, десь злітка. От. Що ще такого цікавого? Не хворійте, тому що ковід – це не весело. Я по собі суджу. And announce that can be works for all. We in about 50 days have another meetup with Spacelift co-founders, Spacelift. So if you'd like, you can check our meetup page and also join this meetup. And we will start in a few minutes.
Probably best for us to wait until Mitchell and Armon have actually joined the Zoom, so we're not introducing people and then it's like, oh, they're not here yet. Oh, there we go. Mitchell's already here.
Already, yeah.
All right, so we can get started soon.
He is not co-host. Let me. Now it can be unmuted. Okay, I don't see Armon.
Hello.
Hello. Good morning.
Yes, yes.
Welcome to Hockey.
Just waiting for Armon to join in. Yeah, we'll get underway. What time is it for you, Mitchell?
10 a.m.
Oh,
That's what, 8 p.m. or something in Ukraine, I think.
Yeah.
Good morning, Armon. Or sorry, afternoon. Time zones.
Yeah, we'll just average it out. It's good afternoon. It's good evening in the Ukraine. Good morning in the US. We'll see.
We have everything right now.
There we go. Thanks for unmuting. I was like, I'm trying to message that I can't unmute here. Hey, good afternoon, good evening.
All right. Shall we get things underway?
Yep. Yeah, we can start.
Let me just, I'll share screen, just have minimum slides to go through. Let's see, which one? That one. All right. Everybody can see the slides?
Yep. Yeah.
All right. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Mitchell for getting up somewhat early. Armon, just the afternoon, right? Thank you for the people that are also staying late. There was somebody here where it was 1 a.m. right now. So thank you so much for joining in. So we have a kind of special edition of the Kyiv Hug today. Now, to give a little bit of context, we had a competition at HashiConf where people could vote for their local hug. And well, you all did. And you actually beat out Bangalore and London by quite a few votes. Mind you, this is a screenshot Amanda Perino took. So I didn't vote for Amsterdam. Don't worry, I wasn't trying to rig this. So congratulations, you all, on winning this. And as you know, you all won a Q&A with the Hashicorp co-founders. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mitchell Hashimoto and Armon Dadgar. Please take it away.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for organizing this, and awesome to see so much of the engagement and turnout. And I know there's been a lot of folks that have been sort of longtime HashiCorp contributors and members of the community. So certainly great to see a bunch of the folks. And Anton, I feel like we've known each other now for a million years. So great to see all of you. So thanks so much for having us here. Intro wise, I think happy to keep it short and brief. Obviously, me and Mitchell co-founded HashiCorp, what now feels like a decade plus ago. And it's been a super fun run all the way through to doing our IPO last December, and super excited about continuing to build and grow the community. And I think the hugs and the community members and the folks like you who are deeply engaged in the community are a huge part of that success. So we're deeply thankful for all of that, and excited to be here and participate.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. Just hello, everyone. Thanks for the enthusiasm. I think I've, even not being here, I've always seen tweets. I feel like from this hug in this region. So thank you so much, and excited to answer any questions today.
Well, yeah, and actually talking about questions, we have prepared a lot of questions for you guys.
All right, that's why we're here.
Well, and I have to say that not all of these questions will be about Terraform. So this is half of success. Well, actually, let me just explain the way how I was thinking about these questions. So people submitted questions during pretty long amount of time. And then I thought about these questions to group them by some categories. So if you think that this question is already kind of answered, or if it's irrelevant, just let me know and we can go to another one. I think we have enough questions for 2 hours, but we have 1 hour, so we need to hurry up. So the first question, I mean, you already introduced yourself, and well, most people who use Hashicorp products already know you pretty well. Let me just rewind it many years ago and ask you, how did you hire first person? And who was this person? Do you remember how it all started? I mean, two of you, who was third person?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. So the third person, actually, probably a lot of folks have interacted with them, whether on our GitHub or Twitter or, at our events, is Jack Perks. And so the story of Jack joining us was sort of a roundabout one. He sort of recruited himself. And so we used to work with Jack at our previous company. Both me and Mitchell spent a bunch of time with him. We were close friends. And then he ended up leaving that company and deciding to sort of go off on his own. So he was actually not originally sort of formally trained in programming or anything. He kind of self-taught himself at the last company. He then decided to sort of move to Berlin and start his own consultancy. So he was doing a bunch of freelance consulting, helping people make various websites and mobile apps and things like that. And so we actually didn't work together for a little while. He was kind of out doing his own thing. And then he decided he wanted to move back to the States and join a team. He was like, being one person is fun for a while, but it's more fun to kind of work with a group. So when he moved back to the States, he dropped us an email and said, hey, I want to move back. Really liked working with you guys. I know you're starting this thing and it's just like two of you, and I don't really know how I can help, but would love to find a way to kind of join the team. And, we sort of went from there.
You're actually missing something there that I don't even know if you knew, actually. When we visited Berlin one year while Jack was still on his own. When he was walking me to the bus stop, because I didn't know where the bus was to get back to the airport, I asked him, I was like, I basically pushed him. I didn't ask him. I was like, you must be getting tired of this lonely consulting life. I was like, give us a call if you ever come back to the United States, because we weren't, being two people, we weren't quite ready to add someone that many time zones away. And so yes, he did drop an email, but it was encouraged.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I have to say that Jack was also pretty much my introduction to Hashicorp. So
cool.
he's
still working here. So
yeah, that's pretty cool. Cool. Then let's talk about like second product, which was after Packer. And how did you actually discover a project to work after? I mean, Vagrant was first. How did the next products appeared on your radar?
So we had a list of stuff we wanted to work on, or problems we wanted to solve, not like exact solutions yet. And so we built Vagrant and Packer. And the first thing Armon and I tried to do, I think this might have been before we took venture funding, or we just took funding, but we tried to build a SaaS around building images around Packer. So we had Vagrant and Packer, and we're like, the next step is to try to make some money. So we tried to build this, like, what is actually now HCP Packer. Basically, we tried to build that 10 years ago. And we were running into the service discovery issue, which we knew existed, but we thought we could kind of paper over it, but it was a challenge. So we actually paused working on the commercial product and started working on a solution for that. So that ended up being Consul, was the third thing we did. And Consul itself, a lot of people don't know, was maybe the third attempt at solving that problem. So the first thing we did was like a Puppet-based DNS updater tool. And we felt that in the world of immutable infrastructure and machines coming in and out, it was too slow to update, to reconcile. It was like, could it be up to 10 minutes? And we wanted services to show up really quickly. And the second thing we did was much more Consul-esque, but was, Armon, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was like a SQL-based something. We did something with SQL.
DNS. Yeah, we took Power DNS and created a SQL backend.
Yeah, Power DNS with a custom SQL backend. I don't remember how I got the catalog information. I think it was still tied into Puppet somehow.
I think we had like a crappy Python-based agent that would like write rows into the SQL base directly.
Puppet would install this agent, and then the agent, because the agent was faster than Puppet, but that taught us a lot about the problem, and we learned a lot. And then we sort of came out with Built and came out with Consul, Surf and Consul.
Right. Well, so when you're talking about this sequence of products, I think first thing is Wikipedia is lying, because Wikipedia says that products were launched in slightly different order than the one you mentioned.
Let's see. I've never even looked.
Yeah, I don't even know what Wikipedia.
I think it says Vagrant, Packer, Terraform, Consul.
Yeah, it's definitely wrong. Yeah, it's missing Surf entirely.
they have the dates right, but they have the order wrong, which is kind of
order right. Yeah. Well, when you're talking about how did you prioritize this project, can you look into modern situation at Hashicorp and explain maybe briefly how or what does it take developers at Hashicorp to propose new ideas or improvement to implement in certain products? I have heard that you guys have some pretty detailed RFC process inside Hashicorp. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. Actually, I'll share a link in here too to the kind of works.hashicorp.com site, because we actually made a big effort to kind of open source, if you will, a bunch of how our like internal process works. And so we created this website to share a bunch of those practices. But yeah, at the heart of it, we have a very almost like open source culture within the company. So, as you would guess, like all of our internal repos are broad visibility. Everyone basically has access to everything. And so we create, a series of kind of mailing lists internally. One sort of PRDs at, which is sort of product requirement docs, and the other's RFCs at Hashicorp, which is sort of a blast for all of the RFCs. And so pretty much anyone in the company can create an RFC and sort of, put together a proposal on, hey, I think we should have this feature X, it should do, it should have this new widget that does, has these foo setting and a bar setting and a bad setting or whatever. And so they'll kind of propose that, usually validate it with their own team first, kind of get buy-off, and then they'll share it with the kind of whole company. in this sort of RFC at mailing list. We're starting to outgrow the process a little bit just because there's 600 people in our R&D org, so it's getting a little bit unwieldy to have that blast radius. So we're starting to look at like how do we refactor that and maybe like have like tag-based subscriptions. So you're like, maybe I only want to see like the Vault related RFCs or the Terraform related RFCs. I don't want to see like every RFC. So I think we need to get a little bit more granular than the way we've been doing it. But I think by and large, the culture and the ethos is the same, which is like anyone should be able to create these documents and sort of publish them. And then you might subscribe to the subset of them that are interesting to you and leave comments and feedback on them. So that's kind of the more day-to-day. And then we also have what we call sort of the Hashicorp Labs group. And that group is designed as sort of an incubator for like entirely new projects and ideas. So if it's not like if it's just like a feature, that'll usually go to like the product team who's maintaining it, they'll add that feature. But if it's like, what if we want to propose a whole new product, a whole new service, right? And so that's where we created this proposal engine, which is similar. It's kind of like a different RFC. It's a different document template we use, which is sort of an incubation proposal. But anyone can submit that and it goes to our labs team, and then the labs team basically reviews those on a quarterly basis and presents it back out to the executive leadership of like, hey, here's the top 3 ideas that people presented, that we think would be an interesting new, infrastructure capability or secure capability or networking capability or whatnot. So it's a very kind of bottom-up driven ethos.
Right, but this is only related to the developers themselves, right? So it's not public information unless a lab decided that this is the direction you guys want to go, right?
Exactly, yeah.
I see. Yeah, it makes perfect sense, at least to me now. Since you guys are attending Hashicorp user group Kyiv, I have to ask this question. This question was voted enormous amount of time. I don't know why. I mean, I'm located in Norway, but all my heart belong to Ukraine still. And the problem which Ukrainians have is that they cannot attend certain websites like portal.cloud.hashicorp.com or HashiConf global website. They also couldn't buy exams to take certifications because Ukraine is just blocked and sanctioned. So I know that you guys already know about this because somebody told you probably many times. This is just an enormously upvoted question. You probably don't even have to answer it, really.
No, yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Go for it, Mitchell.
Well, I'll mention that. I mean, I think that we're well aware that Ukraine itself is not sanctioned, right? It's only for the U.S. It's only the Crimea region of Ukraine. So I don't want people to think that we think that was always correct. The issue we've always had is that we use CloudFront and their WAF product for our geo-based blocking, and the rules that Amazon provided were not fine-grained enough to target only the Crimea region. So we've always wanted to fix that. It's always been a hard priority for us, but the good news is that our security team has been working on it, and we bought a different database that AWS doesn't provide, and they rolled out the changes this morning. So hopefully today sometime that's fixed. We don't expect the database to be perfect, so there's still going to be certain parts of Ukraine probably that we expect that will be incorrectly blocked, since these databases tend to err on the side of caution, I guess, with the law. But we hope that most of it is available now. Soon.
Yeah, I'm sure that everybody in Ukraine will be able to try it out. Because second question by popularity, which was not actually mentioned this time, but I have been asked this many times myself, are there plans to hire people from Ukraine? Because, I mean, remote first, Ukraine is big. So do you guys plan to hire people from there?
Yeah, I mean, I think over time, our goal is to basically light up every country. And I know Mitchell has talked about this a little bit on sort of Twitter and in Hacker News. And it's like, I feel like a bit of the misconception of like total remote is that we can like day one hire anywhere in the world. And I think that the challenge and the reality is like every country we go in, we have to set up a full legal entity as a subsidiary. We have to set up banking infrastructure. We have to get sort of a benefits provider and payroll provider. And so there's a bunch of machinery that we need to set up per country that we light up, because otherwise the employees will have a terrible experience, right? They'll sign up and they'll have no payroll, no benefits, no ability to get anything basically. So that's kind of our limiter. And so what we have internally is we have sort of our international expansion task force that just creates a prioritized list of countries. And basically we have enough sort of like legal, finance, HR capacity to like onboard about one new country every quarter, just in terms of like how much work it is to kind of onboard and set up every single one of those. So we have sort of a whole list of things, and our goal is eventually like, yeah, we will get to sort of lighting up, practically speaking, the whole world. And so Ukraine is definitely up there. I know there's a bunch of awesome tech talent for sure. There's certainly a bunch of the big companies that we'd love to be able to sort of sell to and partner with commercially. So, I think in kind of the fullness of time, we'll have both sort of engineering folks as well as sales folks and support teams all kind of focused there. So it's a bit of a matter of time for us. And I think it's just kind of working through the sort of like endless queue of countries, as you can imagine, for us to sort of be able to onboard everybody.
And I think, I have much less visibility now since stepping down from being executive last summer. But prior to that, I mean, I know that, the finance team always had a list that they were working on with regards to this. And I'll be honest, some of it was put a bit on hold due to all the work that we had, that team had to start doing for the IPO. So I expect, I don't know, because I'm not on the exec team anymore, but I would expect that that'll start spinning back up again at some point. But it is just, to reiterate what I said in my Hacker News comment, what Armon just said, it's a surprising amount of work and money and difficulty to hire in any new country. So we are trying to do that.
Right. Yeah, that's looking promising. Great. So, I mean, we have already 20 minutes in this event, and we have not talked about Terraform. Why? How it's even possible? So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about Terraform. One thing which I want to start this discussion with is when I first, not first, when I met you, Mitchell, in Berlin in 2018, you said one very interesting phrase to me when I asked you, like, hey, there are so many issues. What's your plan to actually improve or reduce the amount of open issues? And you said that if there are open issues in open source project, it means that the project is being used. And since that time, I thought like, oh my God, that's a piece of wisdom which I have never heard and never thought about. So since that time, I have a lot of issues in my own projects as well, just because I think they're being used. No, but actually talking about quality metrics, what's like criteria, or what are the quality metrics for Terraform releases? There were certain releases, for example, 0.15.4, which introduced breaking change, and it was a minor version. Objects have changed outside of Terraform. It is one of very popular issue on GitHub. A lot of people complain about it. Martin replied to it, and I think issue has kind of finalized. It's not going to be fixed. So my main question is, what are the quality metrics for Terraform releases? Who decide that this release is good to be shipped? Because usually you guys ship it on Wednesday or Thursday. So quality metrics is probably a big topic.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think Terraform struggles, I think, a little bit from the curse of getting popular before we fully got it to sort of like what we would consider a 1.0. It's a great problem to have, but a bit of a curse in its own way. And I think we felt this pain with a bunch of releases in the pre-1.0 release. I mean, I think everyone, I think our hill to die on was probably the .12 release for many, many different reasons. But I think I think the balancing act and the challenge that team has always had is, I think there's sort of the ideal vision of where we want the product to be and like what the features and capability and user experience should be. And then there's like where we are today. And so then the challenge is like, how do we evolve it there in a way that's sort of like minimally breaking, right? And I think the challenge is it's like, there are gaps in the user experience that like functionally the only way to improve is to break them, right? Like we can't both retain compatibility and, sort of get to what we wanted to do. And I think our view was always like, hey, before it's a 1.0, we sort of have that leeway to make those breaking changes, and people will understand there's a reason we didn't call it a 1.0. I think the flip side of that is Terraform was so massively popular by .11 that we sort of lost that luxury. Like, it was already so broadly used. People were running it in production. They had tens of thousands of lines of Terraform, hundreds of thousands of lines in their organization. And so in some sense, like, even though we didn't call it a 1.0, people treated it like a 1.0. And so I think this has caused an enormous amount of pain with things like the .12 upgrade cycle and some of these breaking changes where it's like, I think a little bit of our view is like, hey, from a semantic versioning perspective, we never called it a 1.0. We never told you it was a 1.0. You treated it like one, but we didn't call it one. And I think the blame is on both of us, frankly, right? Like, it's like, obviously shame on us. Like, we should have done a better job acknowledging that, like, even though we didn't call it a 1.0, it's kind of too late. Enough people treat it like that. Enough people use it that we should be treating it like it's a 1.0. And we can't break the backward compatibility as aggressively as we would otherwise. So I think that was a bit of a learning lesson for us, frankly, on some of this stuff. And some of it's just a mistake, right? Like, sometimes things slip through and they don't get caught by unit tests or integration tests or whatever. So, I think obviously with all of our projects, we have a whole gamut of unit tests, integration tests, acceptance tests. Usually we'll try and pilot out new releases internally before we ship it. So, like, we'll push new versions of Terraform out to Terraform Cloud, or we'll use it in the Hashicorp cloud platform. Same with Veld and Consul and Nomad, et cetera. So we'll try and make sure that we're sort of validating them before it gets sort of shipped out to the community. But some of these things just slip, right? Especially just given the surface area of the features and capabilities. It's like, it's just a huge matrix of things to test. But it is an area that we're focused on, not just specific to Terraform. So a lot of our teams are actually starting to build what we're calling kind of like quality engineering teams, or release quality engineering teams, where we're going from just unit and integration and functional testing into more full-blown like test harnesses, which will scan like multiple versions, kind of cross-product integrations, do more like expansive like burn-in testing. So for systems like Consul and Nomad are a great example, where it's like, there's a class of bug that you only find when you're running 15,000 nodes of Consul. Like, you just don't see that type of issue in a unit test because you just don't have enough noise and variability and chaos, right? Like, you just need a 15,000 node cluster that you're putting under extreme load for some of those bugs to even show up. And I think you kind of need to treat Terraform in that same way, which is like, yeah, you might need to run 100,000 or 1 million lines of different Terraform config to find some of those edge cases that break where, a 2,000 line happy path is not going to trigger the bug, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's where we're just kind of growing up and maturing internally, is like, we're now investing in those kind of release quality engineering teams as well. And so hopefully, we get better over time.
I think there's a pretty big difference. I would hope there's a pretty big difference between our stance on Terraform pre 1.0. So even in the 0.15 series versus post 1.0. I think one thing we pushed that team really hard on, and I think they did a pretty good job with it, was making it really clear what compatibility promises we are making now. So 1.0 has that document. Like, for example, one of the things that is not covered under our compatibility promise is like CLI flags, for example, even post 1.0. However, there's like things like keywords and module, HCL syntax that is covered under that. And so I think the specific issue you brought up with 0.15.4, I think it was annoying of us. It's difficult. I don't remember the full context of that, but I do remember the 0.15 series was sort of a rush to push in all the breaking changes we could, because we knew that that was the last release before 1.0. And so that was sort of part of that. From what I've been told about that issue, again, I'm not on that team anymore, but from what I've been told from the leadership team on Terraform, is that they aren't saying no right now. Like, Martin locked it and stuff, but it's mostly because I think all the discussion, we realize it's a problem. There is a problem. And so they are looking into ways to make that better. I don't think you'll see stuff like that though anymore since the 1.0, and even like looking at the change logs, right? Like the word breaking change, this isn't like a mandate. They had to not use it, but the word breaking doesn't even exist anymore past 1.0. I think they've done a much better job.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So then if we're talking about problems or some things related to lack of quality, I mean, it's a little bit sad to say, but in certain phases there were some things like that. So if you would be able to redesign Terraform from scratch right now, which parts that exist now you would remove or implement it in completely different way?
Oh man, that's a good
That's
question.
a great question, actually.
Other than provisioners.
You can't just take that away from us.
I mean, yeah, provisioners were always, I mean, I was even when, I worked full time, cut every release of the project up to like 0.9, I want to say. And provisioners were always annoying because I never wanted provisioners, but was really pressured into it. But the reason I didn't want provisioners was because I know what happens from a maintainability standpoint with provisioners because of Vagrant. Like I was already, 4 years into Vagrant, and provisioners were a absolute nightmare to maintain. And I was like, I don't want to introduce, like, they are a practical problem from a maintainer standpoint. They're impossible. And so it's like, how do you solve a user problem, but you introduce this impossible to maintain feature to solve that problem? And it ends up creating different problems. But I would say like, that's one aspect the open source community doesn't understand so much, because they just took me as saying no. And eventually there was so much anger around me saying no, I said, fine, I'll introduce them. And then the problems that existed in Vagrant appeared 4 years later in Terraform, and then we had to remove them, which makes people mad in a different way. And so that's really frustrating. But I think for me, the thing I would change the most is not around provisioners. I think, the HCL2 stuff that we did, and HCL2 isn't even as good as we would have wanted it to be, because we had to maintain some compatibility with Terraform initially. I think HCL would have been significantly different if I could restart Terraform today. I don't think I would use, I think I would still introduce HCL. I don't think I would use like a full-blown programming language or something else. And then the other thing I think I would do is sort of change the way the backend systems work. Backends, like in the Terraform verbiage, the remote backends and stuff. I think I would have made that more first class, because we ended up bolting that on later, which has made the integration with Terraform Cloud and systems we don't maintain either, like external systems, harder. So I think I would have thought through that a little better.
I feel like, some of the other pieces I reflect on is I think we always knew modules would be an important piece, but I feel like the core Terraform architecture around modules was always a bit of a horror show in terms of how it's implemented. And I think that's always resulted in these like weird edge cases people have had of like module ordering things, or like count on modules, or, there's a bunch of these weird edge cases that exist. And it's like hard to explain why they exist, because like, if you're just a user of the language, it seems like it should just work. But if you're an implementer of it, and kind of the horror show of how that graph engine has to deal with it, modules are not quite first class in the way that the internal system thinks about them. So I think if we could do it again, I would have probably made the internal implementation much more module aware, and that way we wouldn't have some of these weirdo issues. I think I don't know what we want to call it, the embedded HCL programming language, if we want to call it that, like the thing that has like functions and lets you do sort of basic logic. I think the original version of that was like the world's most challenged programming language, from a lack of type system and, things like that. And it's obviously evolved over time and become a lot better, but it has the same constraint of like, it can't break backward compatibility that much. But I think we could have done a much better job with that thing out of the box.
I think that's a good example of like, I love that, because we get tweets and emails all the time about like thinking that we're just idiots. Like we don't know how to make, something that is less stupid. But the reality is like, we might be a little dumb, but we have really smart people. And the more real reason is backwards compatibility. Is like when we originally designed HCL2, we have an original design document somewhere still. It was a much richer type system, and there was functions and there was all sorts of stuff. And when we got to actually figuring out, okay, how do we get from HCL1 to HCL2, we realized we had to throw a lot of that away, or it would require more breaking changes that were more painful than what we already introduced. And so we had to take this sort of watered down, I think, approach, which is a huge improvement, but still, if you look at it if you were to build it from scratch, you wouldn't do it this way.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the pragmatic principles. Like we were trying to be a pragmatic balance of like, how do we fix a bunch of it and learn from our mistakes, but not like blow up the whole universe and rewrite it all.
Well, yeah, actually, I made a few notes while you guys answered it. So overall, you mentioned provisioners, HCL2, backends configuration, modules, type systems. Well, according to top 10 most upvoted bugs in Terraform, there are still few things which are pretty much impossible to fix within Terraform 1.0 version. So if you would be leading Terraform project again, and let's say your job is to make Terraform 2 successful like never before, would you have Terraform 2 in the works already? Because the thing is that a lot of people have a lot of challenges with existing limitations which were introduced, and it's impossible to fix, for example, partial execution or variables in backend and lifecycle, inverse glob in targets, sensitive variables, and list goes and goes on. So does it seem logical to you guys that Terraform 2 has to be already planning and kicking? And I mean, it will be backward incompatible in some way. But is it something on your radar already, or do you believe into magic Terraform CDK, which will suddenly come and fix everything?
I don't think it'll magically fix everything. Oh, sorry, Mitch, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I was just saying the exact same thing you were saying.
Yeah, I definitely don't think CDK will magically fix everything. I do think a lot of those pieces, our belief is that we can improve them incrementally without it having to blow up sort of and requiring a Terraform 2.0. That said, I think we have a vision for Terraform 2.0, which will incrementally break things so that we can introduce some net new capabilities. But I think a lot of those we can make sort of incremental progress on without it needing to sort of blow up the universe, if you will. So I do think a lot of them we can fix in like 1.x releases and make progress on it without needing to sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think Terraform 2.0 is a ways away. I think we have a ton of like stuff that we want to do within 1.x in terms of just improvements and like new features and new capabilities. So, you know, I don't think we're yet working on 2.0, even though we have a bunch of ideas of like, if we did some breaking changes, what would we introduce?
Yep. Yeah. I think we could incrementally fix a lot of things. We obviously do sort issues by most commented and most reacted and all those sorts of things, and we're pretty well aware, I think, of the challenges that people have, and I think we could get there. You know, it's always hard because even as, you know, we're both engineers, and most of us here, I would say, are probably engineers, and it's, again, like in a totally clean room environment, this isn't a big deal. Like you could fix it pretty easily, fix things pretty easily, for the most part. But we have to keep in mind all of our existing users and modules and all that stuff. And that is, I would say that's where 90% of like slowdowns come from. And that's just like real world software stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. That's a reality. There are still people using Terraform 0.11 in production. And
we know we're trying to get them up.
Yeah. So then, with all the tools which Hashicorp has been developing over years, actually there are 10 tools right now. I mean, if I count correctly, which is a lot. I don't know. Sounds even right. Half of those tools myself. So with all these tools which Hashicorp is developing, it seems to me that there already has to be another product coming in the near future, or maybe eventually, to orchestrate all this. And when I look into open positions, I discovered that there is open position for Director of Engineering in Infrastructure Lifecycle Management. So I was thinking for a second, do you guys kind of expect or anticipate that there has to be some sort of workflow engine? I know you guys are familiar with Temporal, or maybe a pipeline engine like Gaia to orchestrate all of these services somehow. Or do you bet to HCP?
Yeah, it's a super good question. So, and great detective working too. So I think the way we think about it is ultimately sort of maybe two pieces, which is like one, I think what HCP will let us do is actually drive much deeper integrations cross-product. So I think part of it is like, how do we eliminate the need for an outside orchestrator for a lot of these common use cases where, you know, Vault and Consul should just work more closely together, or Vault and Terraform should be more tightly integrated. So I think part of the answer is those kind of horizontal integrations, we can do a lot better job on HCP because we have a common identity and billing and runtime platform, so we can kind of integrate those pieces. So I think that's a piece of it. Is like, how do we eliminate the need for some of that external glue by just doing the integrations ourselves? I think the higher level orchestrator and workflow engine, you know, our view is that's the role of Waypoint, frankly, right? So if I think about, you know, our portfolio, you can almost think about it as like there's two layers. There's what I'll call sort of like platform building Legos, right? If you think about like Vault and Consul and Nomad and Terraform, they're kind of like Lego pieces, right? Like you can build whatever you want with them, but what we give you is sort of a bucket of Legos, and it's sort of like, okay, you want to go build a boat or a helicopter or the Death Star, right? Like you figure it out, right? Like you can kind of build them however you want. And they're not super opinionated in terms of like how they should be used and integrated. Versus, I think something like Waypoint is much less of a Lego piece. It's much more of a solution-oriented view, which is like, hey, as a developer, I really just want to run Waypoint up and it deploys my application. And I really don't like care about the plumbing underneath and how that works. And so I think that's where we're super excited around both Waypoint and then being able to deliver a sort of HCP version of Waypoint, where it's like, can we drive a tight integration with all of the underlying infrastructure pieces where it's like, great, as a developer coming in, you can just be like Waypoint up. And you might say, I have a dependency of a database that gets provisioned with Terraform. I have a secret that's stored and materialized with Vault. I have an upstream I need to discover. Great, there's Consul behind the scenes doing that. Maybe I'm running on Nomad or Kubernetes or, you know, ECS as the runtime platform. It doesn't really matter. We're going to hide all of that from the developer, so they just say Waypoint up. So I think for us, that becomes really like the orchestrator in some sense of the front end experience. Behind the scenes, actually, we've done a cool a talk from, you know, some of our cloud engineering folks about how we use Temporal internally. So we actually use Temporal as an orchestration engine as part of our cloud platform. So behind the scenes, some of that kind of async activity is being coordinated with Temporal, but I think we need to hide that from the user so that, you know, the user experience, you shouldn't have to care. You just say Waypoint up and it just kind of works. But I don't know, Mitchell, if there's anything you wanted to add.
Yep, I would just add that I think if you look at what we've been announcing so far, like there is a lot of work going into HCP in terms of improving doing things we can't do in a self-hosted version. You know, we've always shipped these open source binaries that have little to no dependencies, right? Like they just run on their own. They don't have a database dependency, things like that for the most part. And that has huge benefits, but it's very hard for us to introduce certain difficult features that might require something like a time series database or a workflow management layer or something. Not saying we're building those, that we would depend on those. It's hard for us to ship that into an open source project because as anyone I think here would respect, I think being an operator, like when you install software that has a bunch of other complicated dependencies, it's pretty hard to run that software. So HCP is our way of doing that. And I think the things we've announced that you could see is like HCP Vault with the monitoring capabilities. We could show some really nice metrics and alerts and things like that around Vault. And that's because in the back end, we could run stuff like, you know, Elastic and time series databases and stuff and do interactions with that that we can't really ship in the open source easily. And so HCP Packer is the same way. We're doing a lot with Packer that would be very hard to do. Because the original plan with HCP Packer was to actually introduce like a Packer server mode into the CLI. So you could self-host your own Packer server. And the only reason we didn't do that was not for like a business or money reason. The reason we didn't do that was like, wow, this is going to have a lot of dependencies, like, because we want to use SQL, we want to use all this stuff, and we didn't want to ship that. And so we built it into HCP because now we have SQL managed by HCP internally. We have Cadence and Temporal managed by HCP internally. We have Redis available. We have all these tools available that HCP Packer now uses really heavily, and it lets us like ship features better and faster.
Yeah, that's a slightly different answer from what I actually expected, because when I said orchestrate, I was thinking that you will mention something like Terraform workspaces, Terragrunt features. So then let me ask another question, which was also upvoted quite quite frequently, I would say. So the question is, does Hashicorp have any plans to include in Terraform functionality features which Terragrunt, Terraspace has, like reusable of global variables, global Terraform state settings, and a few other things?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Oh, go for it, Mitchell.
Well, I was going to say nothing definitive that I could promise on the roadmap, but in terms of those features, like a really big focus of the Terraform team right now is improving sort of workspaces, both in the CLI for sure, as well as Terraform Cloud, making those more cohesive in the same thing, since as everyone here knows, they're a little bit different right now. And then just making it easier to use them from an earlier stage. They're not as complicated. So, and I think that just like naturally overlaps with Terragrunt and stuff. So we're not like, I would say we're not taking a look at Terragrunt and saying, what do they do that we should do? We're more looking from it from a Terraform standpoint, which I think is how Terragrunt came to be, right? Which is like, what are the weaknesses in Terraform that we could improve? And I expect that'll overlap a little bit with Terragrunt and so on. But it really depends on user feedback and stuff. And we've heard plenty about some of those features.
Yeah, I think what I would point to is like, I think what's awesome about having such a big Terraform community is like people are kind of solving their workflow problems and building tools like Terragrunt to kind of augment it. And I think if I look at early days of Terragrunt, like a huge part of what they solve is some of the like workflow around state management and locking and things like that, which over time like became more integrated with Terraform Cloud and the Terraform CLI. And so like some of those things became less relevant outside of Terraform because like the core product solved for them. And so I think for us, anytime we see like people feel the need to build a tooling around Terraform to solve a workflow problem, what it identifies to us is sort of a gap in the product experience. It's like, okay, clearly we didn't do a good enough job solving it natively that people felt like they had to build around it to fix that thing. And so it's a good signal to us of like, how do we continue to evolve to like solve some of those? So like, better variable management, like we're, doing a beta right now with Terraform Cloud around what we call variable sets, which let you sort of set global variables, if you will, and then share it across multiple workspaces. That'll go GA in the next, few weeks here. So things like that will kind of incrementally come out in terms of like, okay, great. How do you do, variable management across many different workspaces or treat them like global variables? So I think incrementally, we're going to kind of solve some of those problems. Multi-workspace is definitely on our mind. I know Mitchell actually created his own Terraform provider to orchestrate some of that stuff himself. That was a bit of sort of an unofficial hack project that he did. So it wasn't like an official thing, but I think it keeps highlighting those opportunities for us of like, yeah, clearly there's a gap around multi-workflow, multi-workspace management. And I think, how do we answer that first class in the Terraform sort of universe? So I don't think it's a bad thing that tooling exists around us. I think it'll always exist because like there'll always be some workflow that we haven't thought about or some net new challenge that people discover. And I think that's a great thing because the community is sort of solving for it. But at the same time, how do we make sure that like as many of those common problems as possible, we want to solve it in Terraform? So variable management, multi-workspace, things like that are all things that are on our mind.
Yeah. Well, from my experience,
but just one more thing I want to mention is like we've always been pretty big fans of Terragrunt. I would say like I forgot what feature it was, but we introduced a feature. Oh, it was just like locking. When we introduced state locking a long time ago, that was something Terragrunt did that we felt was important, and so we let that team know well ahead of time that we were working on it. Like we didn't want Terragrunt to think that we're going to surprise them with it or something. We told them this is what we're working on, and then the same way, I think right now we still have a good relationship with them, and we still tell them that we're working on solving certain problems. And I think they're aware of that.
Yeah. Well, then we are talking about Terragrunt or Terraform. Overall, the industry is too complicated. Lots of technologies, accidental complexity on multiple levels. And Hashicorp tools itself are growing in number, in features. So the question is, are you seeing any progress or are you doing any progress towards simplification of it? Because I don't see any significant improvements in development experience myself, and that's rather problematic. Dropping new tool to the ecosystem is far from enough. And I know that you guys have a lot of work around it, which is great. I mean, documentation itself works a lot. But development experience in general is far from optimal. I'm talking about different extensions, different REPL features in different systems. So are there any progress towards simplification of the complexity which we have?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it's something me and Mitchell joke about all the time, which is like, I feel like when we started, like deploying an app was, you set up an FTP link to like your Apache server, drop your PHP files in there and hit the reload. And like, that's what deployment looked like. And now we joke, it's like, I have to write, a JavaScript program that emits a YAML that gets compiled to a JSON that gets fed by a controller that emits a different pod somewhere else. And like 500 layers of software later, like some Apache server reload somewhere. And so we're like, did the universe actually get simpler for developers or like vastly more complicated? So it's definitely something we joke about all the time, which is like all of this tooling is incredibly powerful, but that power comes at a cost of incredible complexity, right? And I think where it gets lost is like there is cases where that makes sense, right? Like, yeah, we have customers, Roblox is a fun one. They publish their postmortem, but they talk about their environment in some detail there where it's like they have 180,000 containers, 18,000 machines spanning the world, hundreds of applications, right? Like, yeah, that level of complexity and that level of scale requires tooling that is complex and powerful. If you have 2 servers running an Apache web server, do you need that kind of complexity, right? Or is that overkill? Probably not, right? And so I think that's one of the areas where we look at where it's like, it's sort of a 2-pronged challenge, which is like, one, we build all of the Hashicorp tools for immense scale, right? Like we have customers that run hundreds of thousands of nodes of our software, right, in their environment. And so they need that type of power and configurability in every knob. At the same time, we have users who are just getting started. It's a startup idea, it's a hack project, whatever. They don't need that kind of complexity. They don't need that kind of power. They want something more opinionated. So I think the balance, and I think what we're trying to always juggle is like, you don't want to take away the power for those users that need it, but how do we get to be a lot more, I'll call it opinionated, if you will, and have more sort of out of the box prescription of like how to do things? And particularly with our cloud product, I think that's a direction that we're pushing is like, great, if I'm signing up for HCP Vault, let's say, can I have an opinionated flow that will set up Vault for me and just say, great, I'm doing a Kubernetes app, I need some key value secrets, and we can just auto-generate the authentication backends and the secret backends and the policy and like just have a very opinionated flow so that great, I can go right away from I spin it up to I'm connected to my app in 10 minutes. If I want to go in and then have custom policy, custom configuration, custom layout, all of that power will still be there because guess what? We have power users of Vault who want to do all of that stuff and they have 10,000 Vault backends configured and like, okay, we're not going to disable that functionality, but can we have a much more opinionated journey? And then I think going back to maybe the waypoint conversation, how do we actually up-level the developer experience so that the developer, frankly, cares a lot less than the operator about a lot of this stuff, right? If I'm the Consul operator or the Vault operator, I care about how this stuff works. If I'm the developer, I don't really care, right? Like I just want to deploy my app and sure, Vault and Consul and Terraform are there, but I don't really care, right? And so I think with Waypoint, that's our opportunity to actually focus more on the developer experience and then have an opinionated integration into our other tools and kind of hide that complexity. But again, if you need it as an operator, if you want to dig in and be like, I'm going to write a custom Vault policy, I'm going to write a custom Consul intention, you can go in and do that. It's not a black box, right? You can go interface directly with Consul or the underlying system. And I think that's kind of how we're thinking about it. But there is this tension, which is like, if you build something that's extremely simple, but it's a black box like Heroku, then the problem is when you outgrow it, you're stuck. Right? There's nothing you can do because you're at the limit of the platform and it's hidden underneath you. And if you build everything that's a complete white box and it's super complicated, then the getting started experience can be like high friction and challenging and has a big learning curve. And so we're trying to figure out, like, is there a middle ground where we preserve the white box and give the operators those knobs, but then present an opinionated, abstracted interface coming into it, where it's like you can have an easier getting started, but if you need to, you can kind of double click into it. Maybe a bit of a long answer, but.
I think that there was this movement like 4 or 5 years ago, which is mostly quiet now, but it always really, I think Armon and I really disliked it. I think it called it like the Giphy movement or something. It's like Google infrastructure for everyone else. And there was somehow like this marketing thing got a ton of traction where everyone felt they wanted Google's infrastructure, and like Google's infrastructure is the way to do everything everywhere. It never made sense to me because I was like, Google's infrastructure is incredibly complicated for an incredibly huge and complicated organization. Why would anyone want that? And I think like the motivation was this sort of false narrative that it was easy to develop and deploy an app within Google because you had all this stuff available. And I think that motivation is good. So I think that, to Armon's point, I think getting the right philosophies and software that implements those philosophies available as a cloud service through HCP or other cloud platforms is a good way to go. Like a good thing that came out of that Jiffy thing was a much higher awareness of security, right? Like one of their things they wanted to do was encrypt all the traffic and encrypt all the data at rest. And prior to, let's call it 2015, I would argue almost nobody was doing that, right? Like almost nobody was doing that. And I think that's a positive philosophy that came out of that. Now running Vault, I'll say as creators of Vault is not a simple thing. Like running Vault in production is not easy. So we have HCP Vault now, and I think that's the right way to go about it. But I think a lot of this complexity, I tend to blame that, which is this huge obsession with being like Google when the FTP folder to an Apache server was fine. Just philosophically, there was issues with it, but we threw everything away for this. And I think we're starting to come back to it now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, pretty easy to to observe, especially taking into account that you are attending Ukrainian meetup where a lot of, I mean, to my experience, much more people appreciate complicated things than it has to be. I mean, managing Kubernetes is what everybody knows, I mean, except me. And that's like taken as granted.
I think Kubernetes is a good example because Kubernetes to run is extremely complicated to run it well, but Kubernetes services make it moves the starting line, right? The complexity turns into the YAML or something, right? Which is a totally different problem. And I think that's a really good example of like, there's a lot of places where Hashicorp products, the complexity right now is running it first, not using it. Using it comes later, but we're also shifting that goal line with HCP so that running it is no longer a problem, but using it now we could focus on usability and stuff. So I think to answer your original question of investing in like developer experience, we're starting to do that more just because we're able to move those starting lines.
Yeah. And actually, I will, I mean, maybe going back to maybe the simplest, the original question almost, like Nomad is a great example of where we're investing in reducing this complexity. So actually what you'll see from us this year is a big focus on what we're calling sort of a Nomad simplification, where I think some of the criticism of Nomad has been like, yeah, it's simpler than Kubernetes, but if you really want a proper Nomad setup, you need Vault, you need Consul, and you need Nomad. And so then like, how much simpler really is it by the time you have all of those pieces, right? And so we took that feedback to heart, and actually a bunch of the work the team is doing this year is around a native integrated and simplified service discovery within Nomad that doesn't require Consul, and a very basic encrypted key value store that doesn't require Vault. So the idea being that if you just have a very simplistic use case, I just want to deploy my app, I need basic discovery, basic static secrets, it's just Nomad, and it can run as a single binary that's in both client and server mode, no raft, right? And so in a single command, you can have a running cluster, you can be deploying things, and have it just be a single, with one command line flag, basically get up and going. And that's an example of sort of driving that focus on simplicity, but without sacrificing and saying, hey, yeah, if you want the power features, we will still have deep integration with Consul, deep integration with Vault. That's how you get all of the capabilities of scale. We're not going to rebuild those systems inside of Nomad. But it goes to your point of like that getting started experience. If I have 10 nodes, maybe all I need is just a single Nomad server, and that's good enough.
Yeah. Well, Nomad was a very good example where people struggle with Kubernetes and then they discover Nomad, and now they fall in love, like Vladimir is writing in chat, Nomad and ECS are my favorites. And that's what I see quite frequently as well after people gave up on Kubernetes. Okay, so then, well, I don't know how much time we still have, but I have about 10 small questions, or smaller questions, I would say. So looking into Hashicorp success plus, well, it's a little bit encrypted message, but I will try to decrypt it in a decent sentence. So Hashicorp had good success and big success. It has incredible growth. It has big amount of investment, which in return makes high risk of losing the pure spirit of open source and open community. What are the common actions to reduce this risk and not to reproduce the same failing pattern of Docker Inc.?
Ouch, poor Docker. No, it's a good question. I mean, I think the challenge Docker had, I don't want to spend too much time dwelling on them, and I'll spend more time talking about HashiCorp, but I think the reality for us is like, we realize our success is, completely tied to the success of our open source community. And I think that's very different than Docker, right? Where Docker, I think, was sort of trapped in the sense that they didn't have a commercial product that was successful outside of their open source. And so they ended up sort of having to cannibalize open source a little bit and, monetizing things like Docker Desktop. I think for us, we've always been really, really clear with our community, which is we have a set of focused open source stuff. And then we have our enterprise focus, which really looks at organizational complexity and how you use our tools in an enterprise setting at scale, right? And we've always said that's how we monetize. We're sort of not apologetic about it. And I think the community understands that. It's like, yeah, if you're using this stuff in sort of a hobbyist, startup, casual way, great, use our open source. If you're a Fortune 2000 enterprise and you need multi-data center and compliance controls and security controls, it's like, that's what the enterprise product is designed to solve for. And you should pay for it because you're getting a ton of value out of it. So I think that's always been how we've thought about it. And so the way our tools get adopted, the way people sort of, contribute to them, the way people discover it is all driven by open source. And so we're deeply committed to that. And so to me, some of the exciting stuff is like, as we've gotten bigger, we actually have more resources to invest in the open source community. One great example of this is, I know all the time as we've gotten bigger, people would complain, hey, we've gotten slower at responding on GitHub, and issues and PRs have languished over time. And, we get that. And part of the challenge is, going back to Anton, your early point was like, it's a symptom of success. The reason you have issues and pull requests is because people are using this stuff. But what we're now investing in, for example, is what we call community supporting engineers. So these are dedicated engineers that their job is just to triage the pull requests and the issues and respond to the discuss comments and like be community facing engineers. And that's it. They're dedicated to that, right? They don't also have to do bug fixes and feature work and other things. So we're staffing teams that are just there to serve the community, nothing else, right? So that we can improve the time to response and consolidate the bugs and make sure that like the smaller issues and PRs are getting closed in a timely way. And that's a whole team that's brand new that we've only started building late last year, focused on all of the products. So I think as we're investing more and more, right, it lets us invest in community-focused teams. It lets us invest in doing more community-focused events, right? Like we do a bunch of more Hashi Talks and Hashi Comps and community-focused stuff. And then as we're adding more engineers onto things like those reliability and release quality teams, like all of that feeds back into the open source to make the open source projects that much more robust, that much more reliable, et cetera. So, I think for us, we're super clear-eyed that the community is what makes us successful. And, we don't want to do anything that would jeopardize that. And we're continuing to invest really heavily in making the community successful.
Well, it's pretty cool. You managed to answer two questions at the same time. So you got 2 minutes more to answer next question. So imagine that you have spent your career somewhere else and the Hashicorp recruiter would propose you an engineering role. Would you join and why?
I think we're probably pretty biased in answering that one. No, I mean, I would answer it. It depends on what team. Depends what I get to work on. I think there's so much you could do. I think it's one of the positive things about Hashicorp we've had, and it's only gotten better, which is that Hashicorp is one of the few places where you could work on vastly different products and challenges. So, depending on your interest right now, we've had people join, work on Terraform, and then decide they want to work on a distributed scheduler, right? And they could just move to Nomad. There's not many companies out there that have a strong community footprint where you could actually change, right? Like if you work for a monitoring company, for the most part, you're going to be working on monitoring tools no matter what team you're on. monitoring, supporting tools. Hashicorp, we have probably like, I don't know, 6 or 7 or 8 vastly different categories. And that's less than our products. I think our products tend to overlap. So I think there's like less categories in our products, but there's a lot you can actually do.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, what I hear from a lot of the folks that like what they like about our culture is sort of a few things, right? Like one is sort of the principles and the culture and the ethos of the company itself, right? Like we take very seriously sort of our no assholes rule, right? So it's a very much, check your ego at the door. We put a huge value on kind of kindness and high empathy and interaction. So I think it's a very friendly, sort of very nice environment in terms of like working with other colleagues, right? In that sense, very highly collaborative. So I think that part of our culture is super great. I think people really appreciate the like remote flexibility aspect of it, the fact that we are kind of globally distributed. To Mitchell's point, the work is incredibly varied. If you want to work at distributed systems at massive scale, or you want to work on security products that protect some of the most, high sensitive material in the world, right? You can work on all of that kind of different sort of spectrum of stuff, which is I think an awesome part of it. And then I think it's a very sort of a team led, going back to the idea of like the RFCs and anyone can propose things. It's not a very top down command and control organization. The teams and engineers have a ton of autonomy in terms of like what they're working on and how they drive product improvement. So I think in that sense, it's great from sort of a product and engineering led culture.
Right. So, but you still don't have position for Terraform module developers. During 5 years, you still didn't make it.
Well, one day we will, and you'll be the first person.
Okay. Okay, then talk to you later. Then let's talk another thing. So how do you invest your free time and money? That's a question. Of course, people are interested, especially before IPO and after IPO. So
I would say, what free time? Yeah, it turns out a side effect of an IPO is that you don't have much of that. It's a good question. I don't know, Mitchell, maybe you want to kick it off?
I mean, I think for me, I have more free time due to stepping down from being executive, but I think that I think it's trying to focus that time more on like personal things. And then I think people who follow me on Twitter are pretty aware that my biggest hobby is flying. So I fly, I guess, like not as a pilot, not as a passenger.
Yeah. Okay. What open source project would you recommend people to pay closer attention to? Not necessarily Hashicorp products, but in general.
Ooh, that's actually an interesting one. I'll give
because you guys are exposed in general to much wider area of technologies, problems, and you may see what is just starting to become popular or on demand. And maybe you can recommend some open source projects like Temporal.
I'll give maybe a few. Yeah, I think Temporal is interesting. So, but I think you already mentioned, so I won't talk about that one more. But I think Temporal is cool. It solves an interesting gap. I think one of the ones that I've always been kind of interested in is things like Prisma and Apollo. And I think what's interesting about them is like so much software is basically just like a CRUD API on top of a database. And so I like the idea that like for some of these simplistic use cases, could you just put something like that in front and just auto-generate a GraphQL? So it's almost like an API as a specification, right? Like if I could almost write a specification and then just auto-generate my API, because a lot of APIs have very little logic. They're just a CRUD wrapper around creating and deleting from a database. So I like that idea of eliminating a lot of that sort of overhead and boilerplate and just auto-generating sort of like a GraphQL type interface for it. So I actually think some of those like Apollo and Prisma type projects are super interesting.
What about you, Mitchell?
Yeah, I mean, there's none that really stand out right now, honestly. I think that it's not, there's a lot of stuff that isn't really an open source tool per se that I think is really interesting. Like I find Fly.io really interesting. They have a lot of open source contributions, but their platform obviously isn't open source. Temporal, I'm biased because we use it and you mentioned it, but I mean, I think that method of programming and of its service is not something that was widely used and still isn't widely used. And I think it should be widely used. yeah, I'm sorry, not a great answers.
Well, no, Fly.io is definitely a project which worth attention. Right, okay, so then we still have a few minutes left, and I have short blitz for you. So it's a few questions, and you don't have to answer very detailed. And I guess let's start with Armon. So Safari in Africa or working on Consul?
Safari and Consul, or working on Consul, you said?
Yes. What do you choose?
I would say the Safari was a nice break after a very busy
Safari
year.
and Consul. Managing Consul in Safari browser. Okay. What about you, Mitchell? Flights or hikes?
Flights.
That was so easy. I knew that.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Then can you describe in one word yourself, Mitchell? Or Armon, it doesn't matter.
I'd say curious.
Curious.
Stubborn, perhaps.
Wow, that's a very good word. I like it. Cool.
My wife would definitely agree, at least.
Yeah. Well, I like to call it adaptable stubborn, because you can change your mind actually at some point. Okay, so what is your less favorite part in working at Hashicorp?
Ooh, least favorite. I mean, I feel like there's always just like, to me, it's like the passion is really for the products, the technology, the customers, the users. That's kind of the fun stuff for me. It's like there's always like any company comes with sort of the management overhead type stuff. So like performance reviews and things like that is like kind of like, it's a bit of a chore, but it's like you just kind of got to do it.
Yeah, I don't have much of that anymore. But I think being an engineer, and this is true in any company, right? Like I think that the non-engineering parts of the job are always my least favorite part, but you got to do it.
Yeah. Okay, and finally, what piece of advice would you give to young developers who want to be successful as you?
Probably just be prolific. I mean, and what I mean by that is I think some people get analysis paralysis of like, what's the perfect programming language to build, or what's the best project for me to work on, or whatever. And I think if I've learned anything, it's like, there's no right answer to those things. You're going to just learn by writing a lot of software, right? It's like, I think I look at what me and Mitchell have done. It's like we've written a lot of PHP and C and Erlang and Python and Golang and written all sorts of different systems. And I think every one of those things teaches you something different and makes you a better programmer and gives you a different mindset of how to solve a problem in a different way. So it's not like, is Erlang better than Python, better than Go? It's like, it's kind of a stupid question. They're all teach you different things. And they all have strengths and weaknesses. And the more of them you learn, the more of them you use, the more you're going to, improve yourself. So just be prolific, learn a bunch, write a bunch, and it doesn't matter, right? Ultimately.
Yeah, I always tell people either new, whether they're young or not, but when they're new to a career, I always give them the feedback of like, be valuable. So it's like, it's not about how many hours you put in or, like doing exactly what everyone tells you to do. I think you just have to, the people that I've seen, us included, but the people I've seen that have become successful fastest are people that aren't replaceable. So like stand out, do something a little bit different, figure out like, there's one thing I messed up as a young engineer. As a young engineer, I would just do whatever my boss told me to do without thinking about it. But really think like, why is he telling me to do this? Like, what problem does he have that I'm trying to solve for him? Because if you understand the problem, then you could start suggesting, okay, I did this. Should we do this next? Because that'll also make this better. And then you just start being unique, right? You're not just someone who could code something. You're someone who does what their boss says. You're someone who does what they say, but also like is aware of what you're trying to do at a bigger level, and you're contributing. And that's how you start getting promoted. And that's how like you're indispensable, basically. And those people tend to be promoted, and like everything becomes better for those people.
Right. Well, I want to say that my list is actually over, but I see that there are still a lot of people in this Zoom. So what if I unmute them? I mean, allow them to unmute, and they can maybe ask questions themselves.
Also, we have some questions in YouTube. I will just And someone write new questions in Slido, so we can go from them. For example, Teleconfi in YouTube ask, is any chance that now Hashicorp as a public company in favor of shareholders will drop open source version in favor of either cloud or subscription-based model?
Let's see. I had a little trouble. I don't know with the connection. Do you mind repeating the question?
I think this question was already answered, actually. So the question was about changing spirit of Hashicorp as a public company and reducing amount of open source version, attention on open source version, and focus more on profit and subscription-based model and so on. I think Armon answered this already, that open source will survive.
Yeah, I think short answer is like, I think the open source continues to be sort of the heart of why we're successful, and we're investing more, if anything, into that. And I think we're not going to change the subscription model. We've had a subscription model for a very long time. We continue to will, and on top of that, we're going to add more cloud-based products moving forward.
Yeah. Okay, and well, I think and another question which was asked on YouTube: does anyone know Terraform version distribution across the world? Well, probably Fastly knows, right?
Yeah, I'm sure I don't know it off the top of my head, but I think we do have some sense of like what the downloads are, and a shocking number of people are still stuck on Terraform 0.11. So I think this is like the Python 2 to 3 conversion, right? It's like people don't want to do the time tax of the upgrade. So most people are on the latest version, and then like the next bump is, it's usually like the latest version, the last version, and then 0.11 because people don't want to upgrade.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, do you have plans to create a GitOps tool, something similar to Flux or ArgoCD?
No, I think there's a lot of good tools already in that space. So,
yeah, but I think Waypoint solves overlap significantly with that. So depending on what you're trying to do, I would say Waypoint is already that, and every release is doing more and more.
What is your hobbies? Maxim is curious. I mean, flying, obviously.
I still program a lot, obviously, on a lot of different, like totally non-infrastructure related things.
I'd say for me, I actually try and find ways to get away from my computer a little bit. So for me, I like big reader. I like photography. I like motorsports. So those are all fun for me.
Okay. Well, I think that's pretty much it. If anyone wants to unmute yourself in Zoom, you have possibility to do so. From my side, I'm really surprised that we managed to go through the whole list. It's pretty cool. Some people are asking, I'm not sure if I should mention this, but what do you think regarding Pulumi? Have you tried it?
I mean, I think I get to speak at a high level, right? We have like CDK TF, so we are aware and open to that model of using infrastructure. So I think what's really important is my background before we created Terraform, and why we made it the way we did initially was that I spent 2.5 years full-time, 40 hours a week as a chef user for installing software on servers, software provisioning, and then I spent another 2 years as a full-time Puppet user. And these were not huge companies. They were probably like 50-person companies. But in my experience, and this has been realized as well with Terraform and what we and our customers, is that the declarative model, I believe, scales much better from both a human and a compute standpoint. However, there are places where the imperative or programming language approach is really valuable. And so even with CDK-TF, we're seeing a lot of adoption of that. I think what's most valuable about Hashicorp compared to something like Pulumi is that we are deeply invested in both. And so you could really use native Terraform HCL stuff at a huge scale, but then you could have a team or two teams or very specific things using CDK-TF, and they work together. And I think that's the best of both worlds, because I found back when I was using Puppet and Chef that I was all in on one or the other. And I found that the declarative one was better to be all in on, but there were still points at which I wanted imperative workflows, but I couldn't do that with Puppet. And now with Terraform, you actually can. So I think that's my view on the whole thing, is you can't be dogmatic about one way or the other. I think that you need to have a little bit of both.
Yeah, and to me, I feel like the analogy I always like to use is sort of like the declarative model feels like it's like using, I'll call it sort of like memory and type safe language, right? Like it's like being in Python. It's like, yeah, you can do almost anything in Python, but there's cases where it's like you need that extreme bit of performance or layout of memory or things like that. And it's like, for those cases, you might want C or C++, but it's like the average use case doesn't need that kind of power, and it just gives you sharp edges where you can kind of hurt yourself. So I think that's how we think about it, is like, should the declarative HCL be the right answer for 95% of the use cases? Probably. And then for the ones where it's like that last 5%, it's like, that's why we have the Terraform CDK. It's like, you can go crazy and write all sorts of complicated programming abstractions, but the risk of doing that is it becomes hard to understand and it's easy to blow your leg off, kind of like C++.
Luckily, it's not so powerful yet, so people will not be able to blow the whole leg out. So yeah,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
the work is going. Okay, great. So on this note, I want to say big thanks to you guys, Mitchell and Armon, for spending awesome, I don't know what time of the day, but morning and afternoon. And I'm sure that you guys would enjoy Kyiv if you visit it as much as we enjoy you attending our Hashicorp user group. So I want to say thanks to all people who submitted questions, and it was very interesting to read a lot of questions. I have to admit that I didn't ask questions which were purely technical, because as Armon mentioned, there is customer support engineer role in Hashicorp who's supposed to answer these questions. Literally questions about how to do certain things. Well, I think it's better to ask on discuss.hashicorp.com if you have these questions. And yeah,
I might not know the answer even. Mitchell's a little closer, he might, but yeah, I probably wouldn't even be able to tell you.
yeah, but it was really good to have you guys with us. And I want to say thanks to Maxim, who is currently struggling with COVID, but he's a great guy. And thanks for trusting this opportunity to me to be moderator today.
Well,
And
thank
you.
Yeah, you did a great
All
job.
right.
We got through all of them. Thanks.
Awesome.
See you later.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thanks to the whole group. Appreciate you making the
Thank
time.
you.
Chat with you
Bye.
soon.
Thank
Bye.
you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.